They didn't leave Hollywood, the scandals chased them out. For all its glitter and legends, Tinseltown has always had a darker side, where a single rumor could end a career overnight. What happens when the most famous faces in America are forced to run, not for the cameras, but from the headlines? As the whispers turned to front-page news, some stars made their escape before the world could turn on them. What secrets did they carry, and what did Hollywood lose when the doors closed behind them? Charlie Chaplin. There's a moment in every legend's life when the applause dies down and the world turns cold. For Charlie Chaplin, the little tramp who made the globe laugh and cry, it came not from a failed performance, but from the icy machinery of American politics, gossip, and revenge. By 1952, Chaplin's genius had helped build Hollywood. He was the world's most recognized movie star, a silent era titan, whose artistry shaped modern film. Yet as the curtains closed on his American chapter, Chaplin didn't just exit a stage. He was forced to flee the country he'd helped put on the cinematic map. Chaplin's troubles were a storm decades in the making. While he delivered hits like City Lights and Modern Times, his off-screen life bristled with controversy. The tabloids feasted on his string of marriages, several to much younger women, two of whom were underage when he began relationships with them. Paternity suits followed him like shadows, most infamously with Joan Barry, whose lawsuit and the ensuing trial played out as a national spectacle. The judge ordered Chaplin to pay child support, though blood tests later proved he was not the biological father. Still, the damage to his reputation was done, but it was politics that finally chased Chaplin from America. The post-war Red Scare painted anyone remotely left-leaning as a threat to the nation. Chaplin, never shy about social justice or criticizing the system, was a natural target. His film The Great Dictator openly mocked Hitler and fascism, courageous at the time, but later used against him by anti-communist hawks who accused him of un-American activities. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI compiled a file on him thick with allegations, innuendos, and surveillance. He was called before committees, hounded in the press, and painted as a foreign radical, corrupting the country's morals. The final blow came while Chaplin was at sea. In 1952, en route to the London premiere of his new film Limelight, U.S. authorities revoked his re-entry permit. Hoover, it seemed, wanted him gone for good. Chaplin, bitter but pragmatic, settled in Switzerland. "I don't want to go back to America," he would say, reflecting on the country that had both crowned and crucified him. The world's little tramp became a literal exile, his laughter echoing from afar, a silent rebuke to a nation that couldn't separate art from scandal. Chaplin's forced flight marked not just the end of an era, but a warning. No one, not even Hollywood's brightest star, was immune to the darkness waiting off stage. Ingrid Bergman. For a brief, shining moment, Ingrid Bergman seemed untouchable, the radiant star of Casablanca, the actress whose gentle beauty and raw talent had enchanted America. But Hollywood's adoration is fickle, and in 1949, Bergman found herself not just abandoned by the industry that had made her famous, but shunned by the very nation that had crowned her queen. Her crime was not one of violence, theft, or treason, but of love, a scandal that proved in the moralizing post-war years more damning than any felony. It began with a script and a spark. Bergman, then married to Swedish doctor Petter Lindström, reached out to Italian director Roberto Rossellini, praising his work and expressing a desire to collaborate. What began as professional admiration soon blossomed into a passionate affair conducted in the harsh light of the public eye. By the time the press got wind of Bergman's pregnancy, out of wedlock with a married foreign filmmaker, her image as the saintly star of the Bells of St. Mary's lay in tatters. The backlash was swift and brutal. Columnists called her a homewrecker and a fallen woman. Religious groups led boycotts of her films. The U.S. Senate, not content to let the press have the last word, denounced her as a powerful influence for evil, a phrase that might have seemed laughable if it weren't so devastating. Hollywood's door slammed shut, studios canceled her contracts, and the industry that had built her up now seemed eager to erase her from memory. Bergman did what few stars had the courage or necessity to do. She left. Italy, with its open skies and forgiving culture, became her new home. There, she married Rossellini and bore their child, Pia. For nearly a decade, Bergman lived in a kind of artistic exile. American studios wanted nothing to do with her. Even Sweden, her birthplace, wavered in its support. Yet Bergman kept working, starring in a series of acclaimed European films. Her career was not destroyed, only transformed, far from the Hollywood machine that had once claimed her. When she finally returned to America, it was on her own terms. She won an Oscar for Anastasia, received standing ovations, and, perhaps most importantly, found a kind of redemption that Hollywood rarely grants its outcasts. But the lesson lingered. In Hollywood's golden age, a star's greatest enemy was often the spotlight itself. Fatty Arbuckle. If you want a cautionary tale about Hollywood's capacity for both worship and destruction, look no further than Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. In the early 1920s, Arbuckle was as big as they came, one of silent cinema's first true superstars, a man whose slapstick genius packed theaters and whose contracts broke records. But fame, in his case, proved to be a fragile shield. One Labor Day weekend in 1921, a wild hotel party in San Francisco left a young actress, Virginia Rappe, dead. Arbuckle was arrested for manslaughter, and Hollywood, hungry for sensation, was never the same. The media frenzy that followed was like nothing America had seen. Papers screamed for Arbuckle's head. Moralists pointed to him as proof that Hollywood was a sinkhole of vice. 3 separate trials gripped the nation, the details growing wilder and more lurid with each retelling. Though he was acquitted after the 3rd trial, jurors even apologized to him, calling his ordeal a great injustice. It didn't matter. Arbuckle's name was forever linked to scandal, and his films were banned across the country. The studios, desperate to protect their own reputations, cut him loose. With his career in ruins, Arbuckle had a little choice but to leave the Hollywood he'd helped create. He fled to Europe, a land where audiences remembered him as a clown rather than a criminal. For years, he worked under pseudonyms, directing films for others and living with the knowledge that his own country would never truly forgive him. The shadows were his only refuge, the laughter of his heyday replaced by whispers and innuendo. Even after his eventual return to the U.S. in the early 1930s, the taint of scandal clung to him. Hollywood gave him a few chances, but the public's memory was long, and the industry's appetite for redemption was small. Arbuckle died in 1933, just as his career was beginning to revive. His legacy, once golden, was forever clouded by the events of a single night. A reminder that in Hollywood, reputation is everything, and forgiveness is often out of reach. Louise Brooks. Louise Brooks never fit the mold of a silent-era starlet, and Hollywood made sure she knew it. With her sharp bob haircut, haunting gaze, and refusal to play by the studio's rules, Brooks became an icon of cool rebellion long before the word was fashionable. Yet her fierce independence and rumored scandals, both real and invented, ultimately forced her out of Hollywood's golden circle and into self-imposed exile in Europe, where she would become a legend of a very different kind. Brooks's troubles began with her unwillingness to compromise. Unlike her contemporaries, she flatly refused to play the Hollywood game. She rejected roles she considered beneath her, sparred with directors, and spoke her mind in interviews, shocking in an industry obsessed with image control. Rumors swirled that she was difficult, that she was entangled in a web of affairs, and that her sharp tongue made her enemies at every turn. When she refused to dub lines for her 1929 hit The Canary Murder Case, insisting that her contract did not require it, Paramount retaliated by branding her uncooperative and cutting off her Hollywood prospects. It was the perfect storm for an escape. Brooks left for Berlin, where director G.W. Pabst cast her in the films that would make her immortal, Pandora's Box and Diary of a Lost Girl. In Europe, she found the creative freedom and appreciation that Hollywood denied her, as well as a cultural climate less obsessed with policing women's morality. There, her so-called scandalous behavior, her frank sexuality, her bohemian lifestyle became assets rather than liabilities. But exile is never easy. Brooks's refusal to play by the rules meant that, when she tried to return to Hollywood in the 1930s, she found the doors closed for good. Stories about her supposed misbehavior had hardened into myth, and studios had moved on to more pliable stars. She lived much of her life in relative poverty, writing about her experiences and watching her own legend grow from the sidelines. Only decades later did critics and filmmakers rediscover her work and hail her as a genius ahead of her time. Brooks's story is a testament to both the price and power of defiance in Hollywood. She fled, not because of a single scandal, but because her very existence was a threat to a system that demanded silence and submission from its women. In running away, she found her true voice, a voice that still echoes in cinema today. Dolores Del Rio, the studio system's exile and a return to roots. Dolores Del Rio was once hailed as one of the most beautiful women ever to grace the screen, a Mexican-born trailblazer whose talent and elegance made her a sensation in 1920s and 1930s Hollywood. Yet beneath the surface glamour, Del Rio faced a barrage of scrutiny, racism, and whispered rumors about her love life. When the pressures mounted and the roles began to dry up, she did what few dared. She turned her back on the Hollywood machine, returning to her homeland and becoming an icon of a different kind. Del Rio's ascent was as dramatic as her eventual departure. She was one of the first Latina actresses to achieve genuine stardom in the United States, but her success was always tinged with an undercurrent of prejudice. Studio bosses exploited her exotic image, while gossip columnists speculated about her relationships with fellow actors, directors, and influential men both inside and outside the film industry. The press fixated on her marriage to art director Cedric Gibbons, as well as her later affair with Orson Welles, fanning the flames of scandal with every rumor. The climate in Hollywood grew hostile as anti-Latino sentiment intensified in the 1940s. With the industry turning its back on foreign stars, Del Rio found herself increasingly sidelined, her star power dimmed not by lack of talent, but by the changing tides of studio politics and American xenophobia. Meanwhile, her name continued to pop up in the tabloids, often in ways that suggested her love life was more important than her artistry. Instead of fading quietly, Del Rio made a radical choice. She returned to Mexico, where she quickly established herself as the grand dame of the nation's golden age of cinema. Her performances there, complex, passionate, and deeply rooted in her culture, won her new respect and adoration. She became an ambassador for Mexican cinema. Her reputation transformed from Hollywood scandal figure to national treasure. Dolores Del Rio's journey was not simply a flight from scandal, but a bold reclamation of identity. In fleeing Hollywood's toxic scrutiny, she found a stage where her talent could flourish and her dignity remain intact. She didn't just escape, she triumphed, rewriting the story that Hollywood tried to end. Greta Garbo. Greta Garbo was never a typical star, and that was exactly why she was adored. Her magnetic presence on screen, a blend of sensuality, melancholy, and unreachable mystery, made her a global phenomenon throughout the 1920s and 30s. But as Garbo's fame grew, so did the storm clouds of rumor and scrutiny that Hollywood inevitably brings. With each passing year, the whisper network of studio executives, gossip columnists, and fans tried to peer behind her inscrutable persona. In the end, Garbo's greatest act wasn't played out on the silver screen. It was her sudden, total withdrawal from Hollywood at the height of her powers. Hollywood's hunger for stories about its stars was relentless, and Garbo, fiercely private and wary of the press, became an irresistible target. The industry was abuzz with speculation about her relationships, particularly with other women, in an era when such rumors could kill a career. Her close friendship with playwright Mercedes de Acosta and actress Mimi Pollack fueled countless tabloid stories and coded references to her sexuality. Meanwhile, Garbo refused to conform to the studio's expectations. She dodged interviews, rarely appeared at premieres, and kept her private life fiercely guarded. This only intensified the public's obsession and the press's determination to crack her facade. As the 1940s dawned, Garbo's sense of alienation from Hollywood deepened. She was exhausted by the manufactured drama, the ceaseless questions about her love life, and the backroom maneuverings of studio bosses eager to control their biggest asset. After her final film, Two-Faced Woman, 1941, was poorly received, Garbo saw her opportunity to slip away. Without warning or fanfare, she vanished from Hollywood, refusing all requests for a comeback. Garbo's flight was not to another country, but to another life entirely. She settled in New York City, adopting an incognito existence, her presence in Central Park or on quiet city streets, an urban legend among New Yorkers. Despite the endless offers for screen returns and the curiosity of fans worldwide, Garbo never again appeared in another film. Her silence, once a tool of her mystique, became a fortress, one that the Hollywood machine, for all its power, could never breach. For decades, Garbo's retreat has been a source of fascination and speculation. Was it the weight of scandalous rumors, the pressure of being both idolized and misunderstood, or simply the refusal to let others dictate her story? In disappearing, Garbo became a legend twice over, first as the face that defined an era, and then as the enigma who walked away from fame and never looked back. Josephine Baker. Josephine Baker was a force of nature, dancer, singer, actress, and a symbol of both liberation and scandal wherever she went. Born in St. Louis, Missouri, Baker soared to fame in Paris in the 1920s, becoming one of the most celebrated performers of her era. Her performances, charged with energy, sexuality, and satire, dazzled European audiences but scandalized much of America, where racism and Puritanism reigned. When she returned to the United States, Hollywood was never able to accept her on her own terms. The result was a self-imposed exile that turned Baker from a national controversy into an international icon. In the jazz age, Baker's every move was both headline and lightning rod. Her banana dance at the Folies Bergère became legendary, as did her open embrace of her sexuality and her refusal to bow to segregation. American papers called her a primitive, and the racial epithets and moral condemnation that followed her success made her an outsider at home. Even as her fame grew, Hollywood was slow to offer her leading roles, and when it did, it was often only as an exotic curiosity, never as the multifaceted artist she truly was. Hollywood's squeamishness toward Baker was made worse by her outspoken politics. She was a civil rights activist before the term was popular, refusing to perform for segregated audiences and working tirelessly for the NAACP. FBI files noted her communist sympathies, and gossip columns trafficked in lurid stories about her relationships, both real and imagined. Her marriages, her rumored affairs with women, her lavish lifestyle, everything about Baker's life was fair game for public dissection, and none of it fit the tidy box Hollywood wanted for its stars. Rather than fight a losing battle, Baker made Paris her true home. France offered what America could not: respect, citizenship, and freedom. During World War II, she became a hero of the French resistance, smuggling messages for the Allies and risking her life for her adopted country. Her fame soared in Europe, while her appearances in American films remained rare and tinged with frustration. Baker's departure from Hollywood was not just an escape from scandal, but an act of reclamation. She fled a country that refused to accept her for who she was, only to become a legend elsewhere, a symbol of resilience, talent, and unbowed pride. Her legacy today is not just as a performer, but as a woman who chose her own path, leaving scandal behind and embracing a destiny far larger than any movie screen: Errol Flynn. In the 1930s and 40s, no swashbuckler could match Errol Flynn's on-screen bravado. With his devil-may-care smile, acrobatic swordplay, and insatiable appetite for pleasure, Flynn became Hollywood's archetype of dangerous charm. Yet off-screen, his hedonism proved both irresistible and incendiary, setting him on a collision course with America's moral guardians. The scandal that finally ensnared him didn't just threaten his career, it sent him fleeing from the glare of Hollywood's spotlight, a fugitive of his own legend. Flynn's reputation for wild living was no secret. Hollywood insiders swapped tales of his womanizing, drinking, and run-ins with the law. But in 1942, fantasy crashed into reality when two underage girls accused Flynn of statutory rape. The press, already hungry for salacious headlines, pounced. The trial in 1943 was a sensation. Every detail, from the girls' testimonies to Flynn's courtroom antics, splashed across front pages nationwide. Flynn, ever the performer, played to the public gallery as much as to the jury, quipping and charming his way through proceedings. The verdict, acquittal, did little to erase the stain. In fact, the phrase "in like Flynn" entered the language as a not-so-subtle nod to his supposed sexual exploits. Studios grew wary, roles became harder to land, and the press never let him forget. Flynn, who once reveled in being the life of every Hollywood party, began spending more time abroad. He retreated to his yacht, Zaka, cruising the Caribbean, then later to Europe and Jamaica, always in search of places where his reputation didn't precede him quite so loudly. But Flynn's attempts to outrun scandal were always temporary. Financial troubles, further rumors, and the unceasing demands of a public eager for gossip followed him everywhere. He tried to reinvent himself, working on European productions and even writing a memoir, but the damage was done. Hollywood had made him a star. Scandal had made him a cautionary tale. By the time of his death in 1959, aged just 50, Flynn had become a symbol of Hollywood's dark side, the promise and peril of fame in equal measure. His story endures not just because of his films, but because of how swiftly America turns on its idols. Flynn didn't just escape Hollywood, he became one of its most haunting what-ifs, a man forever running from his own myth. Peter Lorre. Peter Lorre's haunted eyes and soft, menacing voice made him an unforgettable presence in films like M and Casablanca. Yet behind that distinctive screen persona lay a life marked by displacement, addiction, and the ceaseless pressures of public scrutiny. Lorre's journey from Weimar Berlin to Hollywood stardom, and then his troubled return to Europe, was driven as much by scandal and rumor as by artistic ambition. Born Laszlo Löwenstein in what is now Slovakia, Lorre first fled political oppression in the 1930s Germany, where his breakout role in Fritz Lang's M had made him a star. Hollywood, with its money and promise of safety, seemed a natural destination. Yet even as he found success as a character actor, becoming the quintessential creepy villain, Lorre struggled to fit in. His appearance and accent set him apart in an industry obsessed with conformity. Rumors swirled about his relationships, substance use, and the shadow of typecasting that seemed impossible to escape. Lorre's troubles worsened after World War II. Tabloids relished tales of his tumultuous personal life, failed marriages, gambling debts, and persistent addiction to morphine, originally prescribed for chronic pain. He was often cast in macabre or grotesque roles, which, while iconic, did little to ease the loneliness and depression he privately battled. Hollywood, which had once embraced him as a European sensation, grew fickle as new faces arrived and old scandals stuck like glue. The pressure proved too much. By the early 1950s, Lorre began spending more time in Europe, accepting roles in German and British films, and seeking a break from the relentless churn of Hollywood gossip. His absences grew longer, his American film work less frequent. In the quieter artistic circles of post-war Europe, Lorre found a measure of peace, though his health continued to decline. When Lorre died in 1964, his legacy was already being reassessed. Critics lauded his unique talent, while Hollywood insiders whispered about the pain and secrets that dogged his steps. In the end, Lorre's flight wasn't just about geography. It was about escaping an industry that valued him only as long as he could play the outsider, both on screen and off. For a time, at least, distance offered him the solace that Hollywood never could. Marlene Dietrich. Marlene Dietrich, with her impossibly sculpted cheekbones, smoky voice, and air of knowing sophistication, was a Hollywood sensation whose allure seemed untouchable. But even as she captivated audiences in films like Morocco and Shanghai Express, Dietrich's personal life and politics brewed storms of scandal that ultimately forced her to escape Hollywood, not just as a matter of preference, but survival. From her earliest days in American cinema, Dietrich was always her own woman. She wore men's suits off-screen, posed for androgynous photographs, and lived openly by the rules of her own desires. Rumors of affairs with both men and women were constant tabloid fodder, with her name linked to everyone from Gary Cooper to Mercedes D'Acosta. In the prudish climate of the 1930s and 40s America, such whispers were enough to make even the boldest studio heads nervous. Yet it was Dietrich's politics that ignited true controversy. Born in Germany, she was one of the first major international stars to speak out against Hitler and the Nazis, refusing offers from Joseph Goebbels to return to Berlin and starring in anti-Nazi films like A Foreign Affair. She renounced her German citizenship, became a proud American citizen, and performed tirelessly for Allied troops in World War II, even entertaining soldiers on the front lines. This won her adoration from many, but also brought backlash from right-wing American groups and German expatriates who accused her of betrayal and painted her as a communist sympathizer. The public's love affair with Dietrich was never simple. As the Cold War climate deepened, she was dogged by FBI files, gossip about her sexuality, and suspicion over her friendships in Hollywood's liberal circles. Her refusal to play the studio publicity game, she scoffed at mandatory photo shoots, skipped premieres, and gave few interviews, fueled a growing resentment among executives eager to mold their stars into pliant commodities. When roles became scarce, she took her talents to Europe, headlining cabaret shows in Paris and London, living out of suitcases, and performing for adoring crowds far from Hollywood's suffocating gaze. Though Dietrich would eventually return to America as a celebrated legend, the exile had changed her. She had survived by making herself global, untouchable, and fiercely independent. Marlene Dietrich's escape wasn't just a flight from scandal, but a triumph of will, proof that in an industry bent on control, a true original could still walk away with her soul and her legend intact. Hollywood loves to tell stories about redemption, reinvention, and rise after the fall. But the truth behind the silver screen is far more complicated. Some of its brightest stars were driven to run, not by failure, but by a world that couldn't handle their scandals, defiance, or authenticity. For every name that faded in exile, there's a lesson written between the lines of history. Survival sometimes meant disappearing. Yet these stars' legacies outlasted the gossip. Their escapes became their final acts of rebellion, echoing long after Hollywood moved on.